Welcome to Code Sandwich Hour, a certified fresh event where we talk code and sandwiches, and we do it all in about an hour. This week's special guest is Peter Cooper, who's the founder and publisher-in-chief at Cooper Press. Now, Cooper Press, you may not know, but it's this somewhat hidden engine behind, or maybe you can consider the publisher of several email newsletters, including JavaScript Weekly, FrontEnd Focus, Node Weekly, Jamstacked, which you might know is also edited by CFE founder Brian Rinaldi, and several other newsletters as well. Each of these together, they reach the inbox of more than 500,000 developers every month. With that, let's welcome Peter to the show. Welcome to the show, Peter.
There I am. Hi, how's it going?
Good. Great to have you on.
No, it's been good. It's good to turn up.
All right. Well, let's dive right in and start with, the most important question first.
Oh, yeah.
And that is, what is the best sandwich?
See, I can prepare for this because it's the only thing that I know you're definitely going to ask me. But it was a very simple thing to prepare for because it is obviously the bacon sandwich. I don't really know how much of a thing this is across the pond in the States, but in the UK, it's pretty much it's almost a religious part of a, weekend experience is to have a bacon sandwich at some point or another. I've had to start eating a lot fewer of them since cholesterol and things became something doctors start talking about. But it's still obviously, got to be up there. But I will echo the words of another guest you had, which was Sue Shardlow, where she said the best sandwich is the one that someone else has made. That is a good fallback answer for me. If it's someone else has made it, then great. I love it.
Yeah, then it's generally good. Okay, so tell us about what is the makeup of a bacon sandwich aside from bacon?
Well, this is a game where it's going to be controversial because, when you make a sandwich in England, you have bread, but you put butter in it, which I know I didn't even realize this was such a controversial thing, but there's whole debates online as to whether you should put butter in a sandwich or not. But English people do. And I never did with bacon sandwiches until about 10 years ago. So it's actually a newish thing for me to do this. But yeah, you put some butter in, bread, bacon, done. I mean, it's as simple as that. It's
okay.
Yeah, I mean, it literally is. It's just a way of eating bacon and having an excuse to do so. Like, there's nothing ornate about this. Not even any sauce.
You're like, I'm classing up I'm not just going to shove bacon in my mouth. This is more elegant. I'm wrapping it in bread and butter. Yeah. Yes.
I mean, the fact is, like, if you're going to eat bacon on its own, which I'm perfectly happy to do, it's not very filling on its own. So you could literally eat you could just keep going and going. And, you're just going to cholesterol through the roof. So you need some padding, but rice doesn't really go with bacon and pasta. Like, it's not a breakfast item. So bread, it's the way to go. I guess you could probably have like Pop-Tarts or something, but that's not my style, Pop-Tarts and bacon, that could be interesting. Or pancakes. And that's quite
there was this trend in the States, probably, I mean, bacon's always amazing, but like maybe 8 years ago or so, I feel like bacon it was super trendy and people were putting bacon in everything. And what I came to realize was that it's because it's so super salty that you can pair it with something that is traditionally really sweet, and they just kind of work together. Like there's two things that I think of. There's a local donut shop and a local ice cream shop, and they both put bacon in ice cream, bacon in donuts, and I was like, that's disgusting. Not going to try that. And then eventually did, and it kind of worked because they each offset each other, complement each other. I don't know. It worked.
You might remember the fad there was a few years back around salted caramel as well. That was a big thing. So you mix salt and caramel together, and then you can put it on anything. And it's just like that. It's again the contrast of sweetness and sweet and sour type things going on. But yeah, I tell you, the weirdest thing I ever heard of. I was driving around California a few years ago, and I went through an area that grows garlic very heavily. Like literally, the air smells of garlic. And they sell garlic ice cream. That's just wrong. I don't get it.
That doesn't seem right.
So yeah.
Okay. So when you said bacon sandwich, my mind immediately goes to, and it might just be a thing in the States, but the BLT, where it's the bacon is forward, but we also have mayonnaise, lettuce, and tomato. Now, have you had one of these sandwiches?
Yes, BLT's reasonably common here. I think they're the sort of thing you'd get if you went to say like a Starbucks and you got a sandwich. I think that's quite a common thing to get there. I don't think a BLT is really part of the British culinary kind of history as such. It's definitely an import from the US. But yeah, you could make it that way. I mean, I'm just not a big fan of fresh tomato in anything. It's got this weird kind of insipid taste that I just don't like. But lettuce is fine. So yeah, I mean, if we want to, up our vegetable intake, then that's a good way to do it, I guess.
Yeah, and class up the bacon sandwich even more. Okay, before we move on, so we have to clarify here. For Brian has commented, he's wondering if salted caramel was just a fad, or is it always a thing?
Well, I don't mind it, but there definitely was a fad of them shoehorning it into every type of candy or, cake or all types of things. So, and that's not, again, pulled pork was another one of these, great. Barbecue stuff is great. If you go to Texas, it's there all the time, but pulled pork was a fad as well. And it's, kind of gone up and it's going down, But
Yeah,
I mean, we're used to this stuff. Tech does this all the time, everyone's using GraphQL or no one's using GraphQL. It's like, it's just like all over the place, it's.
Oh, that's a great comparison, because I've done it too. GraphQL specifically, we're like, this is revolutionary. You can make one request and it's you get everything you need at one endpoint. It's amazing. And I just had a conversation last week where we're like, what's this tool? It's literally just a GraphQL endpoint. Can it do something more? You're like, okay, all right, yeah.
GraphQL is pulled pork. I mean, it's the pulled pork of programming. It's tasty. Everyone loves it, but I don't know. I just couldn't eat it every day, every meal. It's it doesn't suit everything.
That's a great analogy.
So there you go.
Okay, so I feel like that's the perfect time to transition into the next part of our show, where we usually dig into more technical topics, and I think we'll get there kind of tangentially. But you, Peter, being the founder of Cooper Press, I wanted to spend a good portion of this time kind of talking about Cooper Press. And I gave a very brief intro at the top of the show, but curious, can you take us back to so we know it's a publishing engine largely for email newsletters, but can you take us back to the early days? So how did Cooper Press become a thing?
It's a bit like a fractal. I can go back and then I can go back and I can go back and I can zoom in and zoom out. It's always getting the right level of depth on this is the tricky thing for me. So you could go back to 2010 when I began Ruby Weekly and kind of the whole idea came around. Cooper Press wasn't a thing then, but Ruby Weekly began as a newsletter and took off quite quickly. Within a year, once I'd launched some other kind of like, I basically think of it as like dominoes. So I had all these Ruby developers and I was like, what else do they do? Oh, they do JavaScript. So you just kind of knock these dominoes over content-wise. So we moved to JavaScript, Postgres, and so on. And once we had a few of those and it was doing well, I was like, well, hang on, let's turn this into a business. And that's where Cooper Press came from. But then, of course, your next question might be, well, why did you even begin Ruby Weekly in the first place? And that allows me to go back a bit further in that I launched a blog in about 2005, I think, 2006, to promote a Ruby book I was writing called Beginning Ruby, which is now on its like third or fourth edition. I'm not as involved with it as I was. Someone else actually did most of the writing for the newest one. But I created a blog to promote that book, but it ended up becoming a bigger thing. It became basically like the main way for people to get Ruby and Rails news for, a good few years. And I saw kind of what was happening with Groupon and Living Social and a lot of the email lists and email related businesses around 2009, 2010, and was like, I like this idea. It works really well from a publishing point of view to be able to kind of push things to people. And the idea came from there. So I already had this audience of Rubyists, and I was heavily involved in the Ruby and the Rails scenes anyway. So I basically just took an audience that I already had and then moved it into something else, and then built it and then moved them into something else, and just kept growing and growing like that. It's been a constant accretion over like the last 10, 15, 20 years, however far you want to go back in the projects I've done.
Gotcha. Okay, so in the early days when you're running just Ruby Weekly, was it were you doing it mostly to share what you had written, or you're in Ruby all the time, so you're following the news and you're like, this is just was it has it always been kind of a synthesis and syndication of what's happening across the industry?
Yeah, because I mean, there's only so much I can do as an individual, even if I was, the most prolific person ever, like, I don't know, a Sindri Sorhus or something of, of Ruby. Like, the most I can do is develop some code and write some articles. Like, there's so much more going on out there. And, one of my, and I kind of assumed that everyone could do this, but I've since kind of realized it's probably a little bit of a special talent, at least, in that I seem to have a good appetite for just endlessly absorbing information from all over the place and, as you say, synthesizing it into something else that other people find useful, which is fits very well with my line of business, and is pretty much what it's all about for me.
So Ruby, and let's if we stay on Ruby Weekly for a minute, since that's still a newsletter today.
Yeah.
How has the way that you source content, has it changed over the last 15 years, or like where you get the content from today? Is it from different sources in a different way than you did 15 years ago?
In terms of the tools and techniques underlying all of it, there has been a gradual kind of evolution over time, but the general approach hasn't significantly changed. We get more submissions now than we ever did. So I would say, perhaps about a third of the items that we run are submissions in some form or another, because
Okay.
people can just hit reply to like any of our emails and we get it. Like, it's that simple, or they're, on Twitter or DMing me or whatever. So I get a lot of submissions, not all of which make it in, but they tend to be reasonably good if they're submitted directly. Other than that, I've built kind of over the years all of these different kind of intelligence, tools just to like look at numerous different places and analyze certain types of signals that are going on. Of course, I follow a whole bunch of feeds through RSS. I have some external curators as well who have their own ways of finding things. We have various ways of hooking into package systems and stuff like that to monitor for updates to popular packages. So we kind of have all these different elements, but there's no I can't have there's no one individual way that I can say, oh yeah, this is the main way that we do it. It's more that there's like 10, 20 different approaches and systems and sources that kind of, again, to use your word, to synthesize everything into what we produce. Like it really is, I'm a bit like an octopus when it comes to content. Like I've got, arms in every single direction, doing various different things. And sometimes, it can be a bad thing, because sometimes we end up with blind spots where, I've focused on certain sources or certain, things, and then I've forgotten to check something. And then it's been like, oh, I've missed this story about, whatever. And like we experience that quite a lot in the JavaScript world, because it's so diverse and different. I've had emails from people from certain, reasonably popular projects, saying, oh, you haven't covered us for like, a few months and we've done this and this. And like, I have to just be really careful all the time not to have too many blind spots going on, but that's part of the business.
So it makes a lot of sense that it evolved and you've got this kind of engine and other folks involved now. But in those early days, was it just you on, because that's probably still the early days of Twitter. Was it just like a series of RSS feeds at that point that you were listening to and reading?
Back then, with Ruby in particular, so Ruby was a little bit different to all the others that have come after, in that with Ruby, I was so heavily into the scene. I was on IRC like all of the time with people. There's, I was kind of, for a good 3 or 4 years, I was in this situation. I was in this channel on IRC called Caboose on Freenode. And the story I always like to tell is that I was basically in a channel with like a bunch of people who've all become billionaires and I haven't. Which is totally fine by me. I don't want to be a billionaire, but DHH was there. Toby from Shopify was there. There were just all these different people that were like, the amazing people of the early days of Rails were there. So if something came up or there was a topic of, contention in the community or whatever, I could pretty much go to like an authoritative source about something and find out what I needed to. That's not so true now. I'm a little bit more detached. I kind of have a bit more of a what I like to think is kind of almost be like an industry analyst kind of role, in that I really am looking from the outside and trying to, join dots together. So it was very different in the early days. I did start off with exactly what I knew and what I was doing day to day. And that's different now. So I've kind of turned it into a analyst job, but from being an actual practitioner at the start. And that hasn't really changed the quality, but it's changed it's changed how broad I can be and stuff like that. It is good to be on the outside looking in sometimes, because I can see trends and not be quite so influenced by my own personal opinion about them. Because I'm not necessarily building JavaScript apps like every single day.
It makes sense. Yeah. And so to put one of these together, you kind of gave us a hint at, actually finding the content, and then yes, you have to synthesize it. But as somebody who's both produced content, but also then we could say tried and failed at newsletters, that it's a lot of work to put them together, to manage the lists, to everything that's involved in it. And so I'm curious, but I think other folks who have had like a slight peek behind the curtain might have a similar question, which is, how, just generally speaking, how long or how much effort does it take to put one of these pieces of one of these publications together on any given week?
It's one of the most commonly asked questions, I think, and it's one that I can't really give a precise answer on, because A, I don't really track it, and B, I tend to just work until I get something done, and then if I'm overloaded or whatever, I'll scale back my work over time. But I'm quite flexible in how I work, so I tend to make sure everything gets done, no matter how little or how much time I've got. But I think this is true of anyone that works like independently or is somewhat in charge of their own work, in that you're kind of always working at it. So I'm always, hitting up, Hacker News and Reddit, and, even my friends that I talk to, generally are all developers as well. So there's always this undercurrent of that I'm keeping up with things and monitoring things and so on, as many of us do. In terms of the actual process of me sitting down saying, right, I'm doing issue X of Ruby Weekly, JavaScript Weekly, or whatever, and I'm going to put stuff together, then that's a completely different thing. It might only take, a couple of hours start to finish, but I've done all of this kind of work, kind of composting content in various systems, where I can say, oh yeah, I wanted to include that, I wanted to include that. And I've clearly already thought about what I was going to do before I even got to that point. So I can't give you a precise number on how long it takes, but it's pretty much just my work life. Like, it just, everything goes into it, which I know sounds a bit artisty and kind of, it's like, it's like saying to, Damien Hirst, or I don't know, Picasso, or someone. I'm not comparing myself to Picasso here, but just going to an artist,
the Picasso
and saying,
of newsletters.
Exactly.
Yes.
It's like saying, how long did it take you? Like, actually, Pete Mondrian, really good option here, because it's very basic. It's lines, it's bold colors, and you think, I could do that in 20 minutes. And you go to them and you say, how long did it take you to make that painting? And they'll say, like, it's taken me 50 years to get here. So I kind of feel like that.
Right.
It's that type of thing.
It's so fluid, like it's so ingrained in everything else that you do, that you can't you just can't extract it into some quantifiable thing. You're like, yeah, make it your main mission in your career, and then and then that's how you do it. It's hard.
Yeah, and I mean that sucks as well, because it makes it really hard to outsource stuff. So
interesting.
We've had quite poor luck outsourcing. So we have some people that we work with, and they're great. But in terms of saying to someone, right, can you just run the whole of, I don't know, JavaScript Weekly? Like, it doesn't work that well, just because it does seem like you do need to live and breathe this stuff, and also kind of have a certain mindset. And there's a whole bunch of different, personality kind of things and work ethic things that need to all come together to make this work. And I'm not saying anyone else is worse, because other people are much better at other jobs than I couldn't do other people's jobs. But running a publication does take a weird combination of skills that not everyone has. And that's why, when we've had successful kind of outsourcing of things, it's generally been to people that already have that kind of mindset. So like Brian, for example, with doing the Jamstack newsletter, we do very, very little to direct that. Like we, clean it up and check things and fix, typos and stuff. But in terms of actually directing it, he's very much in charge. He's like the independent artist, putting together that thing. And that works quite well. But there's very few people that can do that. And of course, that's why, Brian has CFE.dev and, runs all these things and so on. There's people that are good at that type of thing, and there's people that are not good at that type of thing. I couldn't sit every day looking at, Jira tickets, working on a single app every day. And some people can, and that's very profitable for them. So yeah, it's, and when I've come on to shows and people have been like, oh, how can I do X, Y, and Z? It's like, well,
yeah,
it's a bit like, asking Muhammad Ali, like, oh, well, how do I become a boxer? It's like, so yeah, I'll stop rambling, but it's, again, I'm very conscious that I'm trying to compare myself to Muhammad Ali and Picasso and people like that, but I'm just using these examples because they're people that but yeah.
Yeah. And I think that what you're saying and kind of like reiterating through that point is like, even with the Jamstack newsletter, that you've got Brian and can rely on Brian, but Brian has also ingrained himself and his career in this space that is Jamstack. Exactly. And so we probably, we'll see if he comments here, but that he probably can't even really quantify what it would take for him to do his part on a newsletter, because it's like, it's always there. It's always paying attention to everything that's happening in the space. That's just part of life, part of his job.
I think, DevRels probably have a lot of sympathy with this whole idea, because I think there's a lot of developers who simply could not be DevRel people just because they don't have perhaps the interest in talking to people who don't understand certain concepts, or they don't have a way of getting into the beginner's mindset, or a way of getting into, so there's people that can do DevRel, there's people that can do sales, and there's people that absolutely cannot do sales. So there is an element of, okay, yeah, you might be able to take on some of these jobs and get better at them, but I think you already know whether or not you're probably going to be good at sales or not, because you're going to have tried it, something relating to it at some point, and it would have clicked, or it won't have clicked with your personality. So I'm a big believer in doubling down on the skills and the natural tendencies that I have, rather than working on the ones I'm weak at, which is counter to a lot of kind of self-help knowledge out there. But it's like, I only got one life. Why spend time doing something that I'm going to struggle with learning how to do? I focus on what I'm good at, and that's why I do what I do.
Exactly. And so you've been you've been doing this for 10, 15 years or longer. And now you've got this suite of publications underneath Cooper Press. What are your goals? Do you want to keep doing this? Do you want to keep growing it? Where do you see the next 5, 10 years of Cooper Press?
I have absolutely zero idea. So again, this is a very common question, because I don't know, people seem very interested in this type of thing, and I kind of am not, because I have a really weird, just in discussions with people, I seem to have a very weird sense of time, and I'm very, very bad at planning anything more than like 10 seconds in the future. So I'm very good at adapting and changing and dealing with what's happening right now, but I'm not, and I'm good at preparing for the future, but I'm not very good at saying I want to be X in 10 years time. Like, I couldn't answer that question in a job interview. Like, where do you see yourself in 5 years time? It's like, well, I have no idea, because 5 years isn't here yet. So really, my main goal is keeping the show on the road. Like, that's the day-to-day goal, is keep everything running, keep everything, going along, not decreasing or declining or getting worse, slight improvements over time, keep measuring things. And, if magically one day some angel falls from out of the sky and says, oh, I'm going to give you tons of money for your business, then I might go, oh, that's a nice idea. Let's do that. But, it has not yet happened. People have tried, but it hasn't been for me. But I'm just happy to keep doing things. And one of the things I do is I just constantly, I'm a bit like a magpie. I see things that are kind of shiny and they're like, oh, let's focus on that. And then if a nice little project comes out of it, I'll double down on it and see if it works and see if it turns into a thing. And if it does, I'm up and running and I'm going. If it doesn't work, I kill it, off it goes. And that's pretty much all the different projects that I've got going on, all the hobbies that I've got that people see. It's just me playing about. That is my entire life. It's just playing about. And, you know,
that's amazing.
Some of my playing about makes money. So I kind of feel, to a certain extent, I'm kind of retired already, in that I just kind of mess around, do what I like. You know.
Yeah. Well, you actually, that's a great segue into another topic that I wanted to discuss, which I think I found it on maybe the Cooper Press website, that it said something like you've had many experiments that you've run over the years. Some have worked, some haven't worked. And yeah, I'm curious. So it sounds like you're spinning things up quickly, testing quickly, they work or they don't work, and you make these decisions fast and kill them or keep going. I'm just curious to know what's maybe one experiment that has led to something really good, and then on the other side of that, what's an experiment that was an absolute failure that you had to throw away, but maybe you learned something from it?
I'll probably pick a couple of examples because some of them are a little bit kind of tenuous. But just running my personal blog in about 20 years ago, I was blogging really early on, from like about 1999 through about 2006, personal blogging, until Twitter come over and ruined everything. I had so many things come out of that, like the book deal. The publishers just kind of said, oh, we've noticed you've posted about Ruby a few times. Do you want to write a book? Like, okay. And so that's probably analogous now to being kind of mildly successful on Instagram or TikTok, in that all these brands will come out and say, oh, can you model our clothes and stuff? Like, obviously not to me, but you know, it's the modern kiddie way of doing everything. But you know, I kind of had that experience. And I also had people from O'Reilly Media reach out and were like, oh, can you chair a conference that we're doing? Like, okay. So I ended up chairing a conference for 5 or 6 years and ended up helping them launch OSCON Europe as well, which, you know, was quite a big thing at the time. Sadly, O'Reilly are no longer doing events like that, but you know, it was a fun period of time. So just running a personal blog and constantly saying stuff in public just kind of worked, you know, to a certain extent. But then, you know, I've had numerous other projects as well that have led into various things. You know, I launched a like a code snippets website in about 2005, 2006. And then, you know, after a couple of years, I sold it. You know, not for a lot of money. I think it was about $30,000 or something, but it, you know, paid down the deposit on my house, and then, you know, that gave me a place to live, and you know, so
that's a successful project. Yeah.
There's just always been these little things that just, you know, I just think as long as you don't stand still and as you constantly just try little random things, you know, something turns into something good. Of course, now you're going to ask me what is something that completely bombed or completely messed my life up, which, again, as I say, my memory, I have a very odd autobiographical memory and sense of time. So I don't tend to think about failures or linger on them. They don't tend to haunt me very much.
Or you just, you're so quick to dump something to the side because you just like have this innate sense of like, this isn't working, I'm not going to let it affect my life anymore, I'm moving on. Is that more of
I think that there's an element of that, but I'm also quite philosophical in the sense that if I do something and I put earnest effort into it and people don't connect to it or vibe with it, I assume, well, I got it wrong. Like, this isn't that I've tried really hard and failed. It's that I had a bad idea, or it just wasn't, you know, the right thing. The market didn't fit the thing. Like, I don't know. I kind of have a very mechanical kind of business-like way of looking at failure, in that, yeah, like not every, you know, new Pepsi didn't work, but Pepsi don't sit around, you know, new Coke, sorry, not new Pepsi. You know, Pepsi was the new Coke kind of. But yeah, so, you know, when companies launch these, you know, different brands or products or whatever, they don't sit around for years afterwards going, oh, well, you know, remember we did that? Oh, you know, it's really bad. The public does that for them. That's, you know, that's the public's job. But the companies themselves don't sit around worrying about stuff like that. And so I try to be like that. So I can't think of anything that's really played on me that I've really, really failed at. I mean, I guess a lot of people would say that I've wasted a lot of time on things, and so that's a form of failure. You know, there was a whole period of my life where I was trying to get to the US to work because, you know, there was a company that really wanted to employ me there. And, you know, just none of it ended up coming together, a whole bunch of, you know, technical and legal reasons. But again, you know, it's something I've not even thought about that for like years and years. It doesn't play on me, you know. I'm enjoying what I'm doing now and I'm here. Like, I always think, and this has happened a few times, like when I've been buying, you know, when I've bought properties with my wife to, you know, as we move up the property ladder, as we call it, you know, there's been places and we're like, oh, we really want to buy that house. And then you start doing it and then it all falls through and it fails. And people get really sad, like, oh no, I've lost that house. I've really, you know, it's the dream house, blah, blah, blah. Well, every time that's happened to us, we found somewhere that's even better and ended up moving there instead. So that seems to be the way that I go with projects. Like, you know, I might have had a good idea once and then been really keen to see it work, but something else has worked. I'm happy with that.
And it's a good way to put it. Like you eventually fall into something that's going to feel better than the thing that you lost in the past. So that's, yes, I love the looking at life, career, houses in that lens for sure. So I wanted to step back to the to the book a minute. You've mentioned a few times that you wrote the book Beginning Ruby, and you got approached to it to write it because of the work you were doing on the blog. But I think to set the context for folks, a lot of folks who are creating content, whether it's for their job or on their personal site, you know, I think that the idea of writing a book sounds really, really glamorous. Like I get to be the author of this book. Maybe I make some money from it, but you know,
you won't make any money.
Right. Or it could be a huge accomplishment, whatever it might be. But just curious, like what is the, here's the question I should ask, I guess, that would summarize my thoughts are, or is, would you do it again?
Well, the fact that I pretty much handed over the writing of the 4th edition of my book to a co-author probably tells you a lot about the experience there.
Yes.
Yeah, I kind of fell out with the publisher slightly. Things have changed enough that writing books now is a very different proposition than it was in 2005, 2006 when I began doing it. The amount of, you know, what they call gatekeepers and, you know, all that type of stuff, and the technology and the licensing and, you know, the idea even back then of someone just writing something and just sticking it on the web as a, you know, as a book and kind of saying, oh, you know, this is licensed in a certain way. Very unusual back then. Whereas now, you know, everyone's doing it. In fact, you know, it's how most technical documentation is shared now. So yes, I would. The only problem is that, you know, I spend so much time doing my main job that I just don't have the time to do it. But if, you know, for some reason that all disappeared, then, you know, I'd be very, very happy to do it again, because it is very nice to spend that amount of time just focusing on one particular topic and digging in deep. I am really good at the broad stuff, but at the same time, it can be fun to, you know, dig deep into something. And I tend to have to withdraw from that very quickly because of my job, because I just don't have the time to go deep on things. So it would be nice to do that again. But yeah, maybe if, you know, I don't need to run these newsletters one day, I'll do that. But it's not in the plans.
Does it get really tedious prior to publishing? Like, do you have to go through the thing several times before you get to a published version?
Oh yeah, I mean, you know, I review it. There's other people on the team review it, and even then, you know, certain weird mistakes and things can get out. It's just a nature of the business, pretty much like anything. But yeah, I can't think. There's probably some nuance to your question that I'm missing, but
no, that's fair. So you said you handed off the writing of the 4th edition elsewhere. So you assume you ran the first 3. I'm also curious to put out a new edition. Are you starting from scratch? Are you just like reading and making some changes, or is it all starting over?
So I would probably say, you know, 90%, this is from my part, 90% of the writing occurred on the 1st edition. You know, a reasonable amount occurred on the second. The third was pretty much just fixes and, you know, errata and just making sure that all the examples are up to date and using, you know, modern versions of Ruby essentially.
Okay.
The edition that was released last year, which was more targeted at Ruby 3, there was somewhat more changes made just because there were some additions to the language and stuff like that. But the broad, so basically they give you the original files like every time there's a new edition, and you work from them and improve it. You know, you might delete entire sections, but at the same time you've got those files and the structure is already there and everything. So the co-author basically took what I'd created, which is why, you know, I'm technically still, you know, a co-author of the book, even though I did nothing, because they took all of my, you know, work essentially and then just, you know, spruced it all up, brought it up to speed, added some bits, you know, and that's how it works.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, well, with that, I think we're at time where we can shift into what we'll call it the speed round. Sure.
Dun,
Yeah.
dun, dun.
I'm going to put out there a series of 5 quick questions, and
Okay.
you can pass, and we'll see how it goes, like the rest of this. Sure.
All right. Yeah. Well, let's just go for it. I bear in mind, everyone, I have no idea what's going to happen now. So this is
it's going to be wild. Okay. So question number 1. We didn't talk much about it, but you're based in the UK, and so
Yep.
I'm curious if your favorite place to visit. Like if I'm going over to the UK for whatever reason and I end up with a couple free days, what would you tell me to do?
If you're in London, just stay there because literally the whole world is in London. Like, but London is not England. Just to let you know, London. You might think London is in England. London is its own magical, weird place. As soon as you step 20, 30 miles out of London, you're in a totally different country. So yeah, if you're going to pick something, then pick somewhere like Bath or Oxford or Cambridge or anywhere. Like, you know, there's history everywhere. You're surrounded by it.
So you can't really go wrong. Pick a city, go to it, explore.
I mean, heck, I live in a really, really tiny place no one's ever heard of. And the high school that my daughter goes to is celebrating its 750th anniversary soon. So
wow.
There's history like that everywhere. It's you know,
okay.
Yeah, it's weird, but it's good.
Love that. Okay. All right. Question number 2. What is we talked a little bit about mistakes earlier, and so maybe you'll tell me you don't have an answer for this, but the way I was framing this or thinking about this was to tell us about a mistake you've made in your career that turned into something positive for you. So maybe not a failure, could just be like one particular mistake within a project or something like that, but that turned around.
Okay, let me start with something more general, and then maybe that'll work down to an example. So I think, you know, a common mistake I've had over the years is to listen to what people say rather than look at what they do, which don't always line up. So when someone's giving you advice and they say, oh yeah, I would do X, Y, and Z, and then actually when you look at them doing their actual work, they do something else completely differently. Well, yeah, like how good was their advice then? Like, should you really be doing what they do and not doing what they say? That's a very vague kind of general principle. I can't actually think of a really good example of it, but I know it's something that I've run into over the years, you know, whether it's been in, you know, chairing events or whatever. Like there's certain ways that people say, oh yeah, you should do such and such, but then actually people don't like you when you do such and such. Like, and it's like, oh, no one does that. And it's like, well, someone told me to do that. And I think a lot of that exists in programming. Okay. Like I think the word cargo cult gets thrown around a lot, especially it used to in the Ruby space in particular. Like people would see things like TDD and they say, oh, right, there's always blog posts about TDD. So I'm going to do TDD and I'm going to do it in such and such a way because Dave Thomas said so in a book somewhere. And he said this, this, and this. And then you go onto a real project and with real people, you know, in a real company, in a real place, in a real town, and everyone stood around just, you know, do this and do that. And you're like, well, where's the test? Like, I wasn't doing tests today. But I'm not saying that's necessarily right. But what I'm saying is that it doesn't necessarily pay for you to then come in and say, right, well, no, we must do it the absolutely correct way, because you're going to get ostracized very quickly. So yeah,
Yeah. No, that's actually, I love the TDD example as like framing that up for you. In fact, it was such a point of contention for me learning in my early days of Ruby, because the book, I think it was is it Mike Hartle was that was a book that
the Rails
I read.
tutorial, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I read to get started, and that was very much TDD focused. And so I'm like, okay, we have to write tests. Well, I found that it was slowing me down, so slowing my learning down. And so over the years, as I mentored other folks who were learning Rails, I was like, we're going to talk about tests later. We're going to learn Ruby and we're going to learn Rails first. And then it kind of morphed into this. I then got burnt a few times by not writing tests.
Yeah.
And so we're like, okay, let's find let's find a more practical approach. We don't need 100% coverage. We need some percentage and cover our most vulnerable parts. And so, yeah, I feel like the way I translate that for you is like, or I guess to say that to bring it back to say, looking at how maybe not just taking what one person says, but looking at, and not even necessarily what they're doing, but maybe what everybody across the industry is doing, or what seems to work.
There is so much valuable institutional knowledge out there that exists in numerous different silos in whatever profession you're in. Whenever you go into a new job or with a new group of people, there's wisdom that's been built up in that group of people in those teams that really makes sense for that context, that isn't written down anywhere, that isn't necessarily the correct way of doing something, but it works for that team or that use case or scenario that you're in.
Mm-hmm.
And it really pays to be accepting of that and to really understand that, I do think I'm not a big fan of the whole imposter syndrome thing. I think a lot of what imposter syndrome comes down to is that when you think you know something, the formalities of something, and you end up in a situation where those formalities aren't always there, you think, oh, I'm obviously not that smart. I'm not kind of seeing where, all this formality and structure exists. But actually, a lot of the time, it just doesn't. The world is messier than what a textbook says. And I've realized that's not a very quick fire answer, but yeah.
No, but it's great. It's great. I'll take it. Answer accepted.
Age gives you this. And this is the thing, when even my dad was, giving me advice or telling me stories over the years, and I'd be like, oh, yeah, just an old fart telling me all this stuff. And then eventually you become old and you're like, oh, yeah, I remember what my dad said about X, Y, and Z. So if I could just go back and say like, oh, there is some, listen to it. You don't have to do what someone says, but just listen to it and really absorb it and see where it applies to your life. It can be valuable.
Yeah, you're like, I'm never gonna do what my parents did, and then you do it, and you're like,
yeah,
oh God, I'm my parents. And like, but also I get why they did it back then.
And now I'm my dad, so it's kind of weird, but
yeah. Okay, moving on. Number 3 is, so what is one piece of advice you would give someone who is looking to start their own content thing? So a public, like an email newsletter, a blog, a conference, a meetup, any sort of long running thing. What's this foundational piece of advice you would give that person?
Ask yourself why you're doing it, because the key thing about anything like that, unless you're literally saying, right, this is going to be a one-off meetup I'm going to do, or this is going to be a one-off book that I write, or a one-off piece of content, is that consistency really, really will matter. So with a newsletter, it's not something you can do for a few weeks and go, oh, it didn't work, cancel it. Like, you need to do it for a long time. And I know plenty of people that have been in this space and done it for years and years. And then eventually, like, the hockey stick starts to grow, and it really does take that amount of time. So you need to know why you're doing it, because if you don't know why you're doing it, or you don't know what your motivation is, then you're not going to keep doing it week after week. This is even true with me. Like, I'm, as I say, I think I have natural kind of, personality and tendencies and skills that kind of lead me towards doing publishing. But even I, in the early days of doing Ruby Weekly, were like, oh, like, I don't have to do it this week. Like, it's just, I don't want to do it this week. Let's do something else. Well, one way of getting around that problem is to turn it into a business, because when you turn it into a business and you have customers, you can't do that anymore. You can't just say, oh, we're going to take a week off, because then you've got to refund them, or they're going to complain, or blah, blah, blah. So I've always found that actually turning things into basically a business or some kind of transaction, for me, works very, very well. It doesn't suit everyone. Other people have other forms of motivation, whether that's, they've got guilt over giving up with something, or, they're just sheer tenacious people. Some people know they're tenacious and some people know they're not. You need to figure out what the psychology of it is that means that you doing this thing, doing this event, doing this newsletter or whatever, in a year's time, you might not have done super well at it, but it's kind of working. What is it about you that means you're going to keep doing it and not just say, I'm bored now?
And
I think
finding your accountability mechanism.
Yeah. I mean, look back at what you've been like with hobbies. Do you just pick up things and think, I'm really, really eager about this, and then 3 weeks later, it's I'm bored now, I'll do something else?
Right. Yeah.
If you know that's you need to figure out what extra thing is about this new project that's not going to cause that to happen. And that is a real piece of soul searching, talk to your therapist type stuff. That's, and again, it's like with age that you really figure out about yourself. When you're sort of 18 or 20, you just think you're going to do everything and be fantastic, but that's not the case. What is it that's going to keep you going? And I know, especially for people who are a little bit older, a lot of it comes down to responsibilities. The fact is, there's a lot of people in their sort of 30s and 40s, older as well, that have kids, have partners or other sort of family obligations, and the fact is they have to keep going to work every day, otherwise they don't eat. And so that's what keeps them motivated. It's as simple as that. Now, when you start a newsletter or something on the side, or a YouTube channel or whatever, well, if it's not making money, you don't have the motivation anymore. So it takes a bit more, unless you really are saying, right, I'm going to make this my entire business, which is what I've done and why I can do it. As a side project, it's a lot harder to figure that out. You really need to be into it.
100%. And other things get in the way. Yep. Absolutely. Okay. Number 4. So aside from your own publications, what is your favorite or most revered? And you can have 2 answers here. 1, email newsletter, and 2, just broadly digital publications. So like blog site, YouTube channel, whatever.
Okay, so this is very specific, but I guess kind of slightly related to what we're doing now. A newsletter that I do admire is called Pod News. I can't remember what the name of the domain is, but you search for Pod News, all one word, it comes up. And it's actually a daily podcasting newsletter. And you think, well, that's a bit weird. I don't even have a podcast. But it's just so well formatted as a daily thing of keeping up to date with a topic and a space. I can literally look at it for 20 seconds and be like, okay, I get a feel for what's going on in that space now. I kind of know who the main players are, the main launches that have happened. And I really just get this kind of really cool summary of it. The guy that puts together just does a fantastic job. And I've been, inspired by him in various ways. He also was one of the earliest people in email newsletters to kind of put paid classifieds in, which is now a really popular way of monetizing, particularly indie kind of newsletters. So, he's done some interesting stuff there. Guy's name is James Cridland, actually. He's very much an expert on podcasting and radio generally. So he's a good one to follow. And so as you can see, it's actually not just about topic for me. It's also about format is very, that's my publisher hat on. Its format is very, very key for me. I can read publications about things that I have no real skill or talent or particular interest in, but if they're formatted in a certain way, I'm happy.
Makes sense.
I'm just trying to remember the name of another one that I read every single day. I'm really bad with names. Now You Know. So Now You Know is a email newsletter about random stories that teach you something. So it will be just random things from history or random quirky, funny stories that have kind of like a piece of trivia or interesting knowledge about them. Why did such and such happen? And it will be the story of that. So that's a really good daily newsletter, and I really enjoy that one as well, just because it's the sort of thing you read and you think, oh, I've kind of learned something interesting. It kind of pushes that dopamine kind of button in your head. So that's cool.
Okay.
So number 2 point, YouTube channels, he is very up and down and very inconsistent. But it's a guy called Bisquit, which is Bisqwit. He is my favorite YouTube kind of developer, kind of screencaster, whatever you want to call it. He began sort of over 10 years ago. He's been on there a long, long time, building like 3D engines in QBasic and stuff. Like, it's really, really weird, arcane stuff that he does. He did a whole series on hacking so you remember games from the 80s and 90s, because you couldn't have a save game progress thing, you would get these passwords at the end of levels, and you would type the password in when you came back to the game, and it would put you back to the level.
Okay.
And he has gone through like old Nintendo ROMs and all kinds of things, and like disassembles them and works out what the password scheme was for all these different games, and does these amazing screencasts about them. And it's just fascinating. As a developer, it really just, again, pushes the dopamine button, and that's what good content is all about for me. So it's technical, but it's kind of whimsical and fun, and I guess that is what the publications I do aren't whimsical and fun. I'm not trying to be funny or entertaining. I'm trying to summarize an entire area and make you feel up to date about it. But because I do that, I like my content that I consume to be whimsical and funny. And maybe it's the other people way around. Maybe people who are into funny stuff for their work probably prefer more serious stuff, but I don't know.
Yeah.
But those are the things.
Makes sense. And now I have a couple more newsletters to look at, which I just Googled them and they look super interesting. So yes, thank you for that. Okay. Number 5, last question of the day. Ooh. We'll make it a hard one. It's a 4-parter.
So it's 9
here we
questions.
Go. Here we go. This is 9. Actually,
5,
plus
6,
the last
7, 8,
one was
9.
2. Yeah, we had the 5 questions turned into 10 very quickly.
Wow, this is inflation. I mean, I know we're suffering from inflation right now, but yeah.
Okay, so and this one was funny because I asked it, I think, on maybe the second episode, and the answer was so interesting to me that I was like, oh, I'll ask it again. And then I got another good, and I was like, oh, I'll ask it again. So no pressure at all. Yeah. Okay, so the scenario is this: you can take anyone you want to lunch. That person can be living or not living. This is a very hypothetical scenario. So taking this person to lunch, and the 4 things that, or the 4 questions are: 1, who is the person? 2, where are you going to eat? 3, what are you going to eat, or what are you going to order for food if you're going to a restaurant? And 4, what is the first topic that you're going to discuss?
Oh no. Oh, this
it's
is
elaborate.
This is a bad question for me, because I am pathologically asocial. I tell you, I am not the sort of person that enjoys going out and meeting people and eating meals and things. Which is why I'm basically a very online person, because I quite like that. So if I could actually go somewhere with someone and eat something,
or maybe it's virtual lunch. I don't know. We can be creative with this.
I think because I'm a little bit of an opportunist in many ways, it'd probably be someone, and again, I can't think exactly who this would be at the moment, but it would be someone whose experiences are beneficial for me to learn from in some way or another. So, I'm not going to pick someone like, Richard Branson or someone like that who is interesting, but I have no connection with. I don't want to run an airline or this, that, and the other. And his life is very different to mine. So it might be someone who has built up something very similar to, a similar business to me, but who has then gone on to have, significant success with it. In the developer space, that's actually quite tricky, because there's not a lot of people who've really built newsletter companies up and sold them. So, it might be someone like, so there's a guy called, I think his name's Sean Griffey. I follow him on Twitter. He just sold a company called Industry Dive, which is very similar to my company, except the fact is they make hundreds of millions of dollars, and they do newsletters in areas like retail and mining and just other random topics of that nature. So obviously someone like that would be fantastic to catch up with and talk, shop about, because I might learn a lot from what they have to say. But is it the most interesting conversation, perhaps not. So I'm almost feeling like I should backtrack and say, oh, it would be, someone whose experiences are so different to mine that I couldn't help but had my mind open by speaking to them. So I've gone very meta on this already, which is
this is great. I like that we're analyzing the question.
Yeah. This is me all over. I am very meta. This is why I do the job I do, because I think kind of on a higher order of things rather than the concrete things that a practitioner would think about. So I don't know. I'm trying to think of like a really nice example that I can say, and everyone would be like, "Oh yeah, I know that person." It definitely. Oh, I start thinking about people it definitely wouldn't be, but it definitely wouldn't be Boris Johnson. I can tell you that. Actually, this is going to be a very, very unpopular answer.
I'm ready. I'm ready.
This is going to be a very, very unpopular answer, and I do not like this person. It would possibly Donald Trump. Let's say Donald Trump, because A has been the president. No one can argue about that point. And A still thinks he's the president. But B, he would have had access to lots of different information, and I don't think he's probably proprietary enough to kind of keep it all under wraps. So I think it would be interesting. He seems like the sort of person that you could get along with in small doses on a personal level, even if you don't politically agree with anything that he stands for, which I don't. So I think it would be entertaining. And I think for a couple of hours, if as long as he's guaranteed to stay there, I could grill him on all types of stuff and have a go at him and whatever. And, he could tell me all these secrets about the world and whatever. I think it would be very entertaining. So there you go. There's my fun answer.
Amazing. We have Henri commented in the chat. He just says, "Wow," which I feel like.
Yeah. Well, I know. Obviously, the thing I'm going to completely acknowledge here as well is that there will be plenty of people, probably maybe not watching. I don't know. There'll be plenty of people out there that think Donald Trump is fantastic and politically aligned with him and everything, which is fine. I don't, but that's fine as well. But I do think that as a person of historical significance to a certain extent, it would be interesting, and that is true probably of pretty much anyone that has been a president or particularly well known in the world. I'm sure Marilyn Monroe would be fun to talk to as well, but I wouldn't know what to talk to her about. But at least Trump, I could talk about recent history and find out some weird stuff, I suspect.
Yes, weird.
So where are the aliens? I'll say one thing.
That's true. You could probably get the answer to that question. I mean, you cannot argue with it. Would be interesting.
He would have let that go. He would have let that go, wouldn't he? If
that's it. You know what? That's interesting. That's a whole different. We could do a whole episode on speculating on that question.
I hope the aliens are real.
Okay, well, this is great. Thanks for being a good sport, Peter. This was a ton of fun. Really enjoyed having you on the show today.
Yeah, no, it's been interesting. You've thrown me some curveballs there.
That's my favorite part. Well, you handled them very well, and I love the dissecting the questions and all that. But before we go, why don't you take a minute, and if there's anything else that you wanted to plug, anything you're working on, or sharing links to your company or social profiles, whatever you want to plug, go ahead and take a minute to do that now.
Not in particular. Like if people want to follow me on Twitter, I'm on there as CooperX86. If people want to, subscribe to stuff, JavaScript Weekly is a good place to start. But then, of course, there's Brian's Jamstack as well, which I always forget if that's Jamstack or Jamstack. I think it's Jamstack.
Jamstack. Ends with the D, right?
Well, it's called Jamstack with an ED, but the domain name is jamstack.email.
Right.
We thought that was very clever early on, and that seems to work quite well. But I must admit, I don't see many .email domains around.
No,
but it worked for us. So if you go in at that point, or JavaScript Weekly or Ruby Weekly or even Postgres Weekly, you just put something and then put weekly on the end, you hopefully find something cool and fun. And that's pretty much all I'm doing. The main other thing that I'm doing at the moment, which I'm probably making everyone on my Twitter account sick of this, because I'm playing with Midjourney and DALL-E and doing all of the generative art stuff. I never got into NFTs. I can't stand all that NFT crypto stuff. It just does my head in. But this art stuff it's really just blowing me away, and I'm just having so much fun creating stuff, including illustrations for the newsletters as well. It's it definitely has good commercial uses to it as well. So if anyone's ever interested in chatting about that type of stuff, definitely follow me, and I am very, very keen and into that right now. That's my pulled pork of right now. I'm to bring it back to the pulled pork. It's my fad at the moment. It's fun.
We've gone full circle. I saw something you posted the other day. Was it middle-aged men holding mechanical keyboards?
Yeah, that was me.
Collage of them. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah.
All right.
I
Well,
feel like I should recreate this. Here we go. There you go.
I love that. All right. So that's it for the show. For those of you listening into the recording, these shows are recorded live on the first and third Thursdays of each month at 1 p.m. Eastern time in the US, 5 p.m. GMT. The live shows we then later syndicate on CFE.dev and YouTube in video format and as audio, wherever you get your podcasts. Now we're coming back in 2 weeks. That's August 18th for the final episode of season 1. And we're going to have CFE founder Brian Rinaldi on, and we'll do a little bit of a deconstructed episode while we celebrate the 5th anniversary of Certified Fresh Events, which is super exciting.
5 years, man.
5 years. Yeah, lots to discuss there. It's going to be a lot of fun. Okay, from all of us at CFE.dev, thank you for joining for this show, and we will see you at the next one.